President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address was met with mixed reaction. Surprise, surprise, isn't it always? Many feel that it was filled with the same old promises which haven't been fulfilled. Rivonia Circle director Tessa Dooms argues that the pomp and pageantry of Sona as an event signify not so much the state of the nation, but the state of our political culture, predictable, navel-gazing, self-interested, and tone-deaf to the needs, interests, and demands of communities. She joins us now to discuss this and more. Tessa Dooms, thank you for your time. Last week you did say I could call you Tessa, not Ms. Dooms, so I'm going to go with that. As we look at the Sona for 2023, bearing in mind the conversation we had last week, what did you make of the EFF's movements right at the beginning? And were you pleased to see that, considering you'd argued that Sona was a waste of time to begin with?
Well, I mean, I think one of the points that I've made in a recent article I did, that the real state of the nation is a state of perpetual crisis and protest. So in that sense, the EFF protesting within Parliament, as it's done for many years, is not a far cry from where the nation really is, where the country is asking more from its government than, ceremonies and pomp and things that make us feel good about the country, but not really changes anything substantively about the country. And so in that sense, the EFF protesting in Parliament is not off from where we are as a country. The question is that the most effective use of their powers as parliamentarians? And I think over the years, we've gone from the shock value being quite high to now asking ourselves, what do we expect our parliamentarians to do with the power that they have? Because we on the outside of government structures are protesting. I was at a protest during the State of the Nation address a few blocks away from where it was happening, because I don't have parliamentary power, but I would expect that the EFF should, and I hope will, do more than protest, because they have the power to do so as elected officers of the country.
So looking at your commentary now that Sona has happened, although some hopes that it might not, as discussed last week, you talk about the show, really, of Sona. It is a show that is part of the pageantry of it by definition. You take issue with that, not least because of the circumstances South Africa is in at the moment, and you make those points in your piece. But if you engage with the content of the president's actual address, that he deals with unemployment, he raises social grants, he talks to the issues of load shedding and the energy crunch and the cost of living for people, has he not tackled some of the very themes that you think are on the agenda and must be at its very top?
Well, there are two parts to my response here. The first is that, as I've stated before, because this is not a statutory address, it's not something that we can really hold the president to. So he can come back next year and not even report on the things, the many numbers he listed this year, and we really don't have any recourse. And the second part is really that we also can't really engage with this speech substantively. And so it was utterly disturbing to many of us in the country that the president uses this ceremonial speech to make some sweeping announcements that give him incredible amounts of power. Announcements around a new energy minister sitting within the presidency, not within a department that is accountable to Parliament, and a minister of electricity that is above and beyond two other ministers responsible for electricity, energy, and Eskom at this point. We also had the national state of disaster declared during this speech. These are things that the president needs to substantively be able to engage bi-directionally with the public on. So again, the point that I made last week stands, that we need this president to be more accountable rather than give us one-directional speeches that we cannot challenge. We need him to show up more, not less, for parliamentary questions. We need him to engage with the media more, not less, so that we can ask questions. I long for the day that this president subjects himself to an actual press conference, one where we can actually hear from him his reasoning and his rationale for the things that he puts forward. We just can't continue in a climate where the president thinks that he can talk at the nation rather than with it.
In just under an hour, there will be a presidency briefing. I'm afraid the president won't be making the announcements there, though. It will be his spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya. But I suppose something is better than nothing in the circumstances. Tessa, in your piece, you suggest 3 ways forward after you sort of analyze and criticize Sona as it happened this year. You say that we need to re-engage political processes, that we need to reclaim and localize politics, and we need to stop demonizing the people who do dare to contest for political positions. So it really sounds like a kind of activation of citizenry, you could say. How far will that go when, if your argument is correct, the schism between the political elite who are at the pomp and ceremony of Sona and the people of this country, of the parliament, are outside beyond the grills, gathering and dealing with the despair that is living in this country at the moment?
I mean, the point that I'm trying to make is actually that we need to change that around in its entirety, that we need a systemic shift. So it's not good enough to call for people's power unless we're going to include that people's power includes the power to change our systems of governance, the power to change who is in government, and the power to change how governance relates to our daily lives and our daily decisions in our local communities. So if you look at systems like in Kenya, where Kenya has gone for a model of the devolution of power and the devolution of, for instance, budget reforms. So when Kenya goes into a budget process, unlike in South Africa where the budget process starts off with treasury and line departments and ends with cabinet, budget processes must go into public participation processes in a country like Kenya. That is the devolution of power that we're talking about. In the US, in the UK, when we talk about constituency-based systems, as imperfect as they may be, they give people a lot more access to their members of parliament, to their representatives, to hold those representatives directly accountable and be able to even recall them if they're not making the right decisions in parliament. We have to start challenging the mechanisms that we have and the way our democracy is structured. We cannot just be on the outside shouting in. I've often said if South Africa was a car driving towards a cliff, the majority of South Africans cannot just be on the outside, shouting for the driver's attention. We need to be willing to get in the car and take charge of our democracy.
Well, I tell you, we've had a report on Newzroom Afrika Channel 405 today by Zikona Chona following floods. We've had some devastating floods over the last week. She's been in Zwartwater, and community members there rallied together, pulling 50 Rand notes where possible from one another. People literally taking their own money out of their pockets in a rural community to try and mitigate the damage caused by flooding. There are issues with roads. The ward councillor has been saying that they need input and help with developing and building a proper road. But people trying to solve problems that one imagines government should be addressing. So you see a will amongst people, the people of Zwartwater in this case, to try and solve the problem where they can. Children have been missing school because there's a chasm where there used to be a way forward for them to get to their school facilities. So there clearly is that kind of active citizenry happening. How do we harness or build on our own momentum if government is failing us?
The first thing that we need to reckon with as a society, and particularly in communities like the one you mentioned where people have the will to do something, is that we should not abandon this project of the state and the project of having the state as the lever of power to implement projects like that are for public benefit. Because the 50 rands that people are putting together, they've already paid that equivalent and more to the state in taxes, whether it's income tax or VAT. We have paid the state. Our money sits within government. And so the idea that we can just say, well, government is there, so we're just going to do our own thing over here, and we'll create these parallel systems of governance, is not sustainable, and it's not fair, because we are double paying for things. And people in middle classes already know this. They know that they pay taxes to the state, but then they also pay for school, for medical care, we've gotten to the point where we're paying for fire station services. So we're double paying as society because we have left the state in the hands of people who certainly do not want to deliver. And our money is sitting there, and we must reclaim that. And the second part of it is that that community of people who are active and engaged deserve a representative from that community that was willing to go out there and make the state work for them. And so that's why electoral reform and substantive electoral reform must be a conversation we have in this country, because that community is being led by people who are actually caring about their community and willing to do something about it. Imagine if those leaders had state levers in their hands rather than ward councillors that are only accountable to their political parties.
Indeed. I mean, you're talking about not giving up on the state. I think that might be quite a hard sort of argument to make with a lot of people who feel incredibly disaffected and fatigued even by the Sona of this year, never mind just the ongoing sort of like pain that is load shedding, if indeed you do have power to begin with, or running water for that matter. But if we are to have any hope in the state and in governance moving forward, where does the youth fit into that? I understand that there are many young people eligible to vote, into tens of millions who simply do not do so, or over 10 million. I believe it was 16 million for the 2021 local government elections, but I'll need to check that figure. And also youth unemployment. Youth unemployment figures from August of 2022, we were sitting on, I think it was over 60-odd%. So how do we, looking forward into South Africa's political future, have this when young people clearly are removed or disengaged or disinterested?
I think the right word is that young South Africans are disaffected when it comes to politics. They understand that politics is there and that politics is changing their lives, but they do not feel like they can make a change. They are disaffected. A young man in Malawi last year, when we did some work with the Rivonia Circle, said a phrase that always sticks with me. He said, "They get the democracy, we only get a vote." And that our democracy in the eyes of many young people has been reduced to a 5-minute exercise of a vote every 5 years is where part of our problem lies. So if we're going to change that, we're going to have to commit to re-engaging democracy and re-engaging our politics, but to do it on different terms, on terms that center people and communities rather than political parties. We must start to rethink our politics in that way. We must also remember that it is not the government of the day is just the driver at the seat at the moment. But it is our government, not theirs. It is our democracy, not theirs. And so we must reclaim those spaces. We must reclaim those things. And the first part of that is voting. But there must be a daily exercise of democracy that we start creating a culture of. One that is about accountability, one that is about community action and taking community power, and one that is about putting ourselves forward to co-govern. And so there are many people in this country who govern this country and govern in communities, in their homes, in their businesses, that we applaud when they do it there. But the moment they say, "I'm willing to be in government," we then demonize them. Those very same people we say, "Oh, that's great that you started your own business and that you're helping in the community." If that person says, "I want to become the ward council," we then say, "Oh, you're one of the bad guys." If we continue to demonize people who want to, in good faith, put up their hands to take power in the state, we'll continue to have the worst amongst us get into those positions.
Tessa Dooms, thank you again for your time. It's been really valuable to discuss Sona both before and after with you.